Today's show is brought to you by KegConnection.com. Check out the redesigned KegConnection.com and check out the brand new Brew Club Rewards program. That's right, earn points with every purchase and get discounts and deals on future orders. Don't wait to order some of the bigger ticket items. Pay them off monthly with as much as 1 year, zero interest options for qualifying customers. Go to KegConnection.com, use the promo code HHH, and you'll also receive 5% off your order.
Entertaining shows with content that spreads information and sparks discourse throughout the community. This is the Pearl Media Network.
Welcome to the Homebrew Happy Hour. This is the show where we supply the answers to your homebrewing questions and discuss all things related to craft beer. If you have a question that you would like discussed on a future episode, visit homebrewhappyhour.com and click on the Submit a Question link at the top of the page. I am your host, Joshua Stubing, and today I'm joined by Heidi from West Coast Witches Brewing, a home brewer who specializes in hard cider brewing, tasting, and reviewing. Heidi, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited and I'm super stoked.
I'm so happy that we got you on. Listeners of our show know I am no stranger to messing things up or having controversy in this production. Our live show last week was a total cluster, you know what. I was able to, fortunately, salvage a lot of it in post-production and then republish it and just pretend like we didn't mess up the original live. But with you, I call you and my stuff's not good and I have to ask you to literally jump through hoops. But you are here and I greatly appreciate you coming and doing the show and taking the time out of this. I don't know what the weather's like there. We're finally not getting rain here in Austin, so it's a beautiful Monday.
Yeah, you know, San Diego's always sunny. The weather's always nice. So
Yeah.
we're starting to feel like fall finally, which for me is definitely cider season. I feel like this is our time, you know,
Yeah.
to brew and to drink it. And so it's the perfect time of year.
Yeah.
I think.
And that's why I wanted to get you on now because I don't know if it's, like I said, if it's a misnomer, but I always associate like the Halloween season, especially with cider like that. Like I don't know if it's because all the movies I ever watched growing up, Hocus Pocus, that kind of stuff.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like cider and obviously your name being West Coast Witches. I had no,
Yeah.
I immediately just think of Halloween and that kind of stuff. But it is to me the cider season coming up. Is that traditionally the way it's always been, or obviously cider's year round, right? There's no reason why you shouldn't be brewing it year round.
Yeah, you know, I think cider historically is more traditionally on the East Coast, and it's finally starting to become hip, more like the craft beer scene. So I think it's definitely starting to move into that area of where it's cool to drink cider all year long. It doesn't have to be Halloween, but you know, as far as being West Coast Witches Brewing, I'll take it.
Yeah.
It's my Christmas. It's my Christmas season. So for sure, if it makes people more aware of cider, then I'm on board for that for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And much like I think with home brewing, we find, I've been involved in the industry for about a decade. The cooler it gets outside, the more willing people are to brew. Like the more they enjoy it. And it's not like in Texas specifically, my dad and he's the guy I brew with when I'm not at the headquarters with Todd and James. We don't brew, or we haven't brewed since early June, I think, but just because we brew outside. It's been
hot.
it's been so stinking hot, and
Yeah.
and it's just not fun sweating. Maybe some people have different opinions on that, but it's just not that fun sweating for me. But I did
Yeah.
want, like I said, I found you through Instagram. You've got a great following. You've got a growing following, considering your presence is pretty new. Why don't you let's start it with you explaining what is West Coast Witches Brewing and what are your how did you start and the formation of it, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because it started out with me going to a beer brewing class.
Huh.
Like earlier in the year, you know, San Diego's a huge craft beer scene, and I was like, I'm gonna go take a class and learn how to brew beer because
Yeah.
I love beer. So I took the class, like took my little nerdy notebook, was so like
Yeah.
stoked by the time it was over, and then it was a home brew store too. So I started looking at equipment because I'm like, I'm doing this, And then I started looking at like the size of the kettles and all this, and I realized you live in a tiny apartment in San Diego. So let's be real, you're not going to have space for that. And so then I looked over and I saw this tiny little cider kit, and I had just missed the cider brewing class. So I was like, you know what? That might be a good place to start.
Yeah.
Let's just start small so you don't screw this up and spend, money
Yeah.
on the equipment.
Yeah.
So it's really how it started. It was almost like an accidental thing, but it turned into this amazing thing. And I'm obsessed and I brew like, 2, 3 times a week if I can find the time to do it.
Right.
And then, yeah, but West Coast Witches itself, the idea really came because I'm a nerd and I'm an anthropology major. So historically, women have been brewers for thousands of years,
Right. Yeah.
and I came across this article about women who were brewers in Europe. And during that time frame, they were starting to like make money, which was not really looked highly upon during
Right.
those times. They would put a broomstick in the doorway to signify that a batch of beer was ready for purchase. And they would wear these tall, pointed hats when they would go to the market. So they would stand out. It was like a marketing ploy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was like, that's kind of badass. Like, how can I take that idea? And then of course, the witches and apples, the poison apple is like it just all kind of came together naturally. So that's really how it all happened.
Awesome. And I noticed recently, I grabbed it off your Instagram, so I'm assuming it's official. You have a nice new logo, it looks like.
Yeah, yeah. So I have been working on that idea because, my plan is like in a year to try to launch this as an actual business on a small scale. I've been, studying some other craft cideries and just seeing how they started. And it's a slow process for
Yeah.
anything really. And, so it's just more about this year taking time to continue to work on the craft and like improve recipes and just really develop what it is to be West Coast Witches Brewing. And, I really want to make cider cool. And I think a lot of people don't really know how good it can be, like taste wise, and how much fun you can have with playing around with. I did a hopped ginger grapefruit for the summer. And
I
it
think you
was,
posted about that, didn't you?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was so good. Like I don't have any left. Like that's my problem is I brew so much, but then I run out because, I drink it, I give it away. So people are like, "Can I buy some of that?" And I'm like, "Not yet."
Yeah.
But I'll give you some.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so cider is like so much fun because it can be, similar to craft beer. I think there's a lot you can do with it that people don't expect, like, infusing hot peppers and using lactose and, and the apple itself, there's like 2,500 varieties of apples in the United States. So,
I was gonna ask you because I think I was very clear. I'm very ignorant, and I mean that in the most derogatory way about cider. I've enjoyed ciders, and the one I think we talked about before we recorded in Portland at McMiniman's, the Kennedy School. They had a cherry cider that was seasonal that would just blew my mind. But apple, like a lot of our listeners are home brewers for beer. The
mhm.
basics of cider, like apple is a core element, right? Like, I mean, it can't be cider without apple, right?
Yeah, it can't be cider without apples. And I think generally speaking, 85% is like the magic number for
Oh,
it to
okay.
be technically considered a cider. When you move into, because it is fruit based, if you don't have that percentage of apple, you're just making wine.
Okay.
It's very similar to wine. So it's really about highlighting the apple, keeping the integrity of the apple flavor, but then you kind of work in these other flavors and nuances to make it something unexpected.
Yeah. Would you say for cider, are y'all in the golden age of brewing? Or like right now, I always say I'm a broken record. it's the best time in the world to be a home brewer. And I think that probably goes for any part of home brewing, but like home brewing has had its kick for a while. You're talking about making cider cool. Home brewing's now in a decade plus of being cool again, or where people are back to, you know, a lot. The craft is growing, the hobby is growing. A lot of people are home brewing beer. Are you finding that with cider? Is the in the Austin area, the interest seems to be good, but Austin's also, I'm not going to say hipster. Yeah, it's hipster. Like Austin definitely, you know, goes out of its way to be a little bit more bleeding edge maybe on some cultural things. Do you find though that cider is having that kind of renaissance moment?
You know, I definitely feel like on the West Coast specifically, it's been so predominantly East Coast. You know, the Angry Orchard, I think, is
Yep.
one of the, you know, the cider makers that people know they and are familiar with. But I'm seeing on the West Coast, it's just exploding, and we're in a good territory for apple growing. So, you know, Washington State, Oregon, around Portland, Corvallis, all of those areas are just they're just everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's become its own little craft scene, and the market for cider is expected to continue growing. And now that you know, as far as being in the United States, other countries, their cider making is kind of locked into a very traditional process.
Okay.
So, you know, there are rules in other countries. You do it this way, you don't do it this way, and, you know, leave it to us here in the United States. We're like, we're going to be the rebels.
We
We're
do
going to
whatever we
try.
want. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, to give you an example, one of the things that I saw that I was like, holy crap, this is awesome. So there are cider makers out here that are making like slushies, cider slushies.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's perfect for the summer, you know, because it gets hot, and I'm sure out in Austin you guys could probably use that too. But just making cider very different than what it is traditionally, I think is my goal, and other craft brewers' goals, to just make it fun and bring it on the menu. First of all, like,
Right.
to see a cider on the menu is was nearly impossible. I grew up in the Midwest, and moved out here about 5 years ago, and cider wasn't even a thing. Like,
Right.
you couldn't even find it.
Right.
So
Had you even
yeah.
had it at that point?
Oh man, I don't think so. I think the first time I had cider was out here, and it was like Ace, which is a pretty popular.
Yes.
I think that's basically what you find in a lot of the breweries is you get your choice between apple or cherry, and maybe if you're lucky, you might find a pineapple, and that's about the extent of it.
Pineapple, man, that thing finds
Yeah,
its way into everything. My wife puts it on a
yeah.
pizza now. I'm digressing. Like you mentioned, like Angry Orchard. There are like I said, Austin East Sider. It seems like there are areas of the country where the culture is definitely maybe springing up more than others. Do you have like, do you see cider blowing up like craft beer has? Because I know the push is there from a marketing standpoint from these companies, obviously, because it's in
Mhm.
the best interest to you know push their product. That's what you do.
Yeah,
But I do see in my little bubble of existence, cider really growing and complementing. It's not like a one or the other kind of thing where it's like, no, I'm a beer drinker, no, I'm a cider drinker. It seems like
totally.
they're meshing. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Totally. And that's you know, that's it's happening already. And I think, you know, first and foremost, people didn't know that cider had the potential to taste a certain way. And now that we're starting to see these cideries popping up, and people in the industry are pressing the boundaries, and you know, hopping cider, I think it's drawing people from that beer market to at least be willing to try it out.
Right.
And you know, there are some people that are even gluten intolerant, and so it fits a niche there to for people who can't have anything with gluten in it. And that's, you know, I think that could be more of a West Coast thing, but I don't know.
No, Austin too.
I don't know. But yeah, I just think, you don't know if it's good if you've never had it, you've never tried it. And then when you find something, like in your instance, when you went to the con and you had the cherry cider, like you don't know what you're missing until you try it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so, and I wanted to ask you about that too. You said you had a cherry. What was it that you liked about it? What did you appreciate about that as a beer connoisseur?
Oh, I like that. Yeah, my wife just says snob. As a connoisseur, for really the thing that got me with the cider was the how its smoothness. Like it did not, the alcohol didn't punch me in the face, the apple didn't punch me in the face, and the cherry was subtle. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was just like it was. And granted, we had a few beers before that, but I was nowhere near intoxicated.
Yeah.
but we I think we ordered it because Todd, we were at the table, and I think we talked about another episode. Long story short, we had just witnessed some guy have a meltdown at another table because he had to wait like 8 minutes for the waiter to come. It was hilarious. And if we haven't talked about it, people will email me and I'll bring it up on another episode with Todd because he loves that story. But
Oh man, I want to hear it.
yeah, so we were just like kind of flustered, and Todd was like, you know what? Let's just do something we've been in Portland for a few days. We've had a ton of delicious craft beer. Let's try something different. They have a seasonal cider that they're pushing. All the bartenders at the various bars at this place were definitely letting us know that they were trying to push it. And we're like, let's just try it. We're not cider people by any means, but let's just try it. And yeah, the first taste, I was like, the last cider I had was from a local company, and it was decent, but it wasn't anything that was like, oh man, I want to finish that right now, or I want more of that. And it was just a smoothness. It was kind of like, it was like a cherry cobbler in my mouth. Like it like just from beginning to end. Like, and that's what for beer too, though, right? Like when you have that experience with any beverage, I'm not good with words. I'll never be a poet. But it was something that floored me, considering I'd never had that experience with cider before.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I feel about it. And I was surprised the first time I made a cider. I was like, I didn't go in having expectations of like, oh, this is gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
Like, first couple of times you're like, well, it's either gonna work or it's not. And I loved it right away. And that's why I'm hooked. And like, to be honest, I find myself drinking my own cider more. And I feel like that's a good thing. If your stuff is good enough to where you prefer that, then I feel like you're doing something right.
Yeah, no, I feel that way too. And I think humans, we tend to be our most harshest critics. And so like, as much as like me and my dad brew, and I love the beer and we are drinking it, but if there's better beer out there, I typically choose it to drink if I had the option. But like you said, like you would know, like we don't give ourselves the benefit, right? Where if anything, you probably are even still like, I'm drinking it, but I could do better. But but that leads me actually into a question. With homebrewing, a big deal is consistency, especially for the homebrewer that wants to take it to the next level, or if they think they might ever. In cider, is consistency as difficult? Like to brew the exact same tasting batch in 5 gallon or whatever gallon increments that you typically do as a home brewer for cider. Is it easy, or is it also difficult like homebrewing beer, where you find really having to pay attention to the details so that if someone drinks your cider today or in 3 years when you brew that same kind of cider, that they have the same experience?
Yeah, I think it's very similar. Like I said, I haven't been brewing beer, but anything as simple as like your temperature that you brew your cider at is so important. And I think that's something I definitely will continue to try to perfect. I am a home brewer right now, so I'm very small scale. So I think I will have more control over that later. Once I have the ability to use like the glycol chiller and things like that. But right now for me, it's more about just perfecting the recipe itself with consistency. So I track everything, I track everything.
James
nerdy.
would love you. James is our he's not an engineer, but he should be in another life. where he is all about brewer's notes. But like you said, like if you don't know what you did on brew day, you can't replicate it on the next brew day.
Right. So I think it's very similar in that respect is, you're repeating. And then if you find something you think you can improve, you take what you did and then you modify it and you make a note of the modification. And with cider, you can even do like a master batch. So like your base cider. So just let's say just straight apple. You can master batch that. And then when you move it into like your secondary, you can split the batch up and do different things with it.
Ah,
So, yeah, so if I want to try lactose in one and not the other, or, a different juice blend. So there's just a lot of room to kind of play around with that. And it makes the brewing process, I feel like, a lot more streamlined too. And it works for me. So I'm going to keep doing it.
I am a man of streamlined life if I can. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you because again, a lot of our listeners don't know anything about cider. Is it easy to discuss the process? What size batches would you recommend someone getting into cider brewing? And can they use the same equipment that they already have for beer? Or is this going to be, no, you need to have proprietary or set aside gear if you're going to be doing ciders?
I think with cider brewing, you probably already have most of everything that you need. The fermenters, we're not doing any boiling and mashing, so we
Right.
save that step right off the bat, which is nice and easy. So your fermenters, you can do the carboys or a fermenting bucket. I would recommend if you're gonna do something crazy with the brewing, like, I just did a carrot cake one where I put candied pecans in it. Use a
Oh,
bucket.
oh, that
It's
sounds
so much
awesome.
easier. Use a bucket. It's so much easier to clean. But yeah, so it's basically just your fermenter, your airlock, your sanitizer, your yeast, and then your juice. Whether you're sourcing that locally, juicing it yourself. If you're doing it the hard way, you're using like the grinder and the press.
Mhm.
I don't have the space for that, so I do use a juicer, and then I blend as well. You could start out by doing it with juice from the store.
Okay.
So if you have like a really high quality, like organic apple juice from like I don't know what you guys have in your area, but we have like Sprouts or Whole Foods or something like that
Right. Yep.
here. Start with that, and just you're not going to spend a ton of money either playing around with like a gallon. Like start with a gallon, and if it doesn't turn out, you're out like maybe $10 max.
I'm pretty cheap. Can we? No, no.
Can we done that? Let's see if we can get that
No,
down. You can get it on. You can maybe go get it when it's on sale.
yeah.
Cut your coupons, whatever you need. But yeah, just start small, and then you know how it goes. Even with beer, you start small, and then you're like, I need a 10 gallon. I need and it just grows. But definitely start small and just learn every time. That's my best piece of advice is, as long as your stuff is clean and sanitized, and you're just following the basic rules, which are juice, yeast, your bubbler, and your temperature. If you can control the temperature in any way, that's certainly going to help, but it's not even 100% necessary.
I love hearing
So,
that because I am a man of
yeah.
many mistakes. But uh, what is the fermentation process like? If I wanted to have a cider for Thanksgiving to share along with homebrew beer, how much time do I need to plan out ahead for ideal serving dates?
So with cider, the best cider comes from aging. So once everything you get through the fermentation process and you move it into secondary, or some people even move it over to like a third racking. And if you can let it sit, the longer you can let it sit in that stage, the better your cider is going to be. But realistically, I just started a batch like, I don't know, like 2 weeks ago for Halloween.
Okay.
And you can ferment and get it into secondary within like 7 to 10 days, and then let it sit for a week, and you can be bottling. Like it's possible. Do I think it will taste its absolute best? Probably not. Is it drinkable? Heck yeah. So you can accomplish it within a few weeks, but ideally, the longer you can let it sit, the better it's going to be.
I think I just found the new tagline for me and my dad's little home brewing. Is it drinkable? Heck yeah. I like that. I like that. I'm gonna make that on a T-shirt.
That's funny.
If we sell them, I'll work out a percentage
Okay.
cut with you.
Okay.
Uh,
Sounds good.
what are some resources you would recommend to listeners who are brand new? I know like the American Homebrewers Association definitely are trying to be more welcoming to the cideries and the meters out there. Like they're trying to get away from just beer, welcoming the whole, even distillers, we're seeing a presence of them at homebrewing conventions. But do you know, like I know your Instagram, which is at West Coast Witches Brewing, and it's up on the screen. But like I know you post a lot, especially in your story. Like you've posted a lot of tidbits of your brewing process, your bottling process, your kegging process. But are there other resources out there you could recommend to listeners?
It's funny because when I started learning this process, I started by watching YouTube videos.
I
I'm going to
love
be
the internet.
honest. Yeah. I mean, I'm granted, you have to filter through some things, but you can find some really valuable tips. I just got online and started researching forums. I know on the West Coast, there's the Northwest Cider Association. So there's different like communities that you can get involved with, and they have like a ton of information on the process, like down to like the specific science of fermentation and apples. So the information is out there. There's also I got a couple of books. Tasting cider was one of them. There's like the one called the Cider Maker's Handbook,
Hmm.
and that one is actually even used for. There's a certification test through the Northwest Cider Association. That's like a big national certification, and they recommend that book. So I'm studying up so that I can get my level 1 certification. That's my next move this fall when I'm not in school anymore. So information is out there. I
Yeah.
think just it's just like everything else. Just filter through. You're going to probably find some stuff that's not so great, but most of the brewing process is just trial and error anyways.
Yeah.
So, you're just learning as you go.
And I'll put those links in the show notes. Every time I say that, I inevitably get an email that said, "You said in the show you're going to put links in the show note, and you didn't." And then I have to update it. I did notice recently you did move to kegging. In the home brewing world, I'm a little biased with all the work I do for Todd with Keg Connection. Was it as life changing for you as it is for us homebrew? Like bottling to me, beer, like a 5-gallon batch. Again, I can't stress enough how soft I am as a man, but it is terrible. It is miserable. I'm lazy. I don't like it. Bottle bombs scare the hell out of me.
Oh man.
The whole thing, kegging was just like, oh, okay, I'm good. Like this is life changing for you. Is it the same for you? Will you ever go back to bottling?
I still do some bottles. My kind of my routine now is I do enough to fill my keg and then a little extra. So then I will bottle some stuff because, to be honest, whatever goes in the keg, it gets consumed in a very short amount of time, as you know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You. I don't have a kegerator, so I have like a small one that I keep in.
Mine's back there in the corner. If you.
Yeah. It's empty too, isn't it?
It is. It's still empty. I'm so embarrassed. I'm not really that embarrassed. I kept it empty so that we wouldn't be sloshed on the live show. I'm about to fill, and actually here I keep it full of water because my doctor says I need more water. And so carbonated water.
That's motivating.
Oh yeah. My doc, he tells me very motivational things. I won't go into that. That's a whole different show, and you're not my therapist. But
yeah. But kegging for me, it definitely changed. It changed the game. It's so much easier. Like I had a bottle explode. I went on a trip. I had brewed a batch, was timing it all out, and I'm like, okay, I need to check the carb level. So I checked it before I left, and it was like, it's okay. Like I can probably let it go another week.
Yeah.
Came back, got ready to pasteurize, and one of the batch blew up, and I was like, oh man.
Was it dangerous? Is it as dangerous with cider? I mean, imagine it is.
Oh yeah. Well, I rigged my own little bottle shield out of a cardboard box.
That's
It was
awesome. You
yeah.
knew, so you
So
knew what to expect. I mean, you knew the yeah.
I I knew that it was a possibility. So, but then yeah. So switching over to keg is like so much easier. Cleanup time alone. Like I hate scrubbing bottles. That is so tedious. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you're telling me.
it's a game changer for sure.
I solicited some stuff, and someone had written in about ciders, and they actually asked, commercially speaking, are there any ciders out there that you would recommend as a good intro into the cider realm? Because like with craft beer, like when I was of age and in my early 20s in Texas, like real ale and nationally speaking, like New Belgium's, Fat Tire
Yeah.
is a very common like gateway into craft beer. Is there a cider off the top of your head that you would call a gateway into good cider?
Oh man. Here's the thing. I think the one right off the top of my head, they are blowing up, is West Coast based, and it's Two Towns. Two
Okay.
Towns Cider House. They are out of this world. They're expanding too. So I think they're accessible nationwide in different areas. So you'd have to kind of search. I think you can go to their website and see, like where they're located, but they're even going international. So, Two Towns, if you're on the West Coast, you may or may not have access in the rest of the country, but Rev Nat Hard Cider, he's like, the, I would say the company that I most kind of am trying to learn from,
Yeah.
because he's doing just really crazy things with cider. They just had an anniversary party recently, and he took Sour Patch Kids and fermented his batch with Sour Patch Kids, pulled the Sour Patch Kids out, and then turned it into a slushy
Really
for his. Yeah, because I mean, it's all about
interesting.
sugar. It's all
Absolutely.
about the
Yeah.
sugar. So, and then of course, the sour. I imagine it was a little bit more on the sour side, but yeah. So RevNats, Shilling is big on the West Coast. They're up in Portland and around that area. So those would be my top three if you really want to get a good idea of what cider can be and non-traditionally, like hop ciders and rosés and things like that.
Nice. And I mentioned the AHA earlier. I know again they're trying their darndest to expand their reach with brewers of all kinds. Have you ever considered going to a homebrew con in the future? I mean, I know
For sure.
like
For sure.
like I know it was just in Portland, which isn't convenient to you. It's the same coast,
I,
not convenient to
I
San
was
Diego at
so
all. But
bummed. I'm so bummed that I missed it. I was actually traveling, had some family things that I needed to attend to back in the Midwest. So I had already made my travel plans, and I'm like, man, if I had not planned my travel, I for sure would have made that happen. And I do plan to make that. I know it's going to the East Coast,
yeah, Providence, Rhode Island.
Providence. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And I think, there is a cider con too that's dedicated just to cider. So I think that's coming up earlier in the year. I want to try to enter some competitions too. So that's on the horizon as well. Definitely have some plans ahead of me.
And we'll get to that when we wrap it up because I'm going to ask you just to I want to hear your 5-year plan. But before that, no, in Portland, it wasn't necessarily the biggest bummer, but HomebrewCon didn't have as big a showing from ciders as they usually do because I think it was a coincidence. The area was having a cider convention there in Portland at the same time as HomebrewCon. So these cider makers were, I mean, if you had to pick which audience you wanted to show your stuff to, you probably want to pick it to the people who are going there for your specific product, right? Like, at a cider con, everyone there is a cider head and they want to try your stuff. At HomebrewCon, you're still in that phase of having to push it more. Like, hey, try this next, instead of just. But it'd be cool if you could make it to Providence. We're there every year, and it is cool seeing things like mead and cider blowing up. To wrap it up before I let you go, you talked about maybe doing this commercially or on a small scale. What else is in the future for you? Like, how can people learn more about West Coast Witches Brewing? Like, do you, YouTube? I already mentioned the Instagram, Facebook page, anything that you want to mention so that listeners can get more information about Heidi and West Coast Witches Brewing.
Yeah, right now I think I'm mostly active on Instagram. It's really just a matter of time availability for me.
Right.
I do spend a lot of time brewing, and most brewers have full-time jobs, and I'm
We
not
do.
exempt from I'm not exempt from that. So I would say definitely the Instagram. I try to do the YouTube videos as I have an opportunity to do those. I'm not super active on the Facebook right now, so I would guide people towards the Instagram just because that's where I engage with most of the community, which is I have a huge number of beer brewers on there. So it just
Yeah.
blows my mind and it gets me really excited because, I have people who message me and are like, hey, I've never thought about doing a cider. And like now they're doing cider. So it's really fun to connect with that community and feel really supported by the community. So it's just been really awesome.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
how I found you through the grapevine of, I believe a listener actually said, hey, y'all talked about getting people who know cider on the show. I followed this page, and I don't know how
No
old.
way.
Yeah, I don't know how old your Instagram is, but they called it a newer Instagram, so I don't know if you're like, I think your efforts lately have definitely been more like you've been pushing a lot of good content out where it's getting noticed, and that's got to be
Thank
encouraging.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always butter the guests up, but so what we need to do is James and myself and Todd need to do a cider brew day, and we'll phone you in so that you can Simon Cowell critique us and tell us how awful we're doing. But we do.
For sure. Well, I won't critique you, but I'll definitely enjoy watching.
Yeah, we do. What I would love, like, if you ever produce a how-to video, I would love to collaborate because cider is, like you said, one of those things where it is cool to break away from the norm. I love beer. I love brewing beer.
Mhm.
Brewing cider
too.
wouldn't even be that big of a break. You could probably do it on your same brew day. If I had to guess, it's not, if you have the equipment, assuming you have enough to do all the above, but you're not doing a boil and you're not doing a mash. So you can do your
Yeah.
boil and you can do your mash and then start your cider. And like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to configure all the logistics in my head.
Yeah, if you already have your juice from like, whatever source and it's already juiced, I mean, you can get a batch done in like a half hour to 45 minutes.
I liked that.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe I'm gonna
And-
switch over. We're gonna be the homebrew cider happy hour instead. If it
There
ends
you
up if it
go.
ends up being easier, I'll have to switch us over.
Oh, and one thing I will mention that maybe not a lot of people know that we didn't talk about was cider. You can get a pretty good buzz off of a little bit of cider if it's done properly.
Everybody's sold
Like-
now. Now they're sold.
Oh man,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, my average cider, I would say, usually finishes out anywhere from about a 6.5 to 8%.
No way. Wow. You know what?
Yeah.
I don't remember looking at the one at Portland. Is that what's standard? Is that the average ABV range?
Well, I think if you, depending on the apple base that you're using, like if you don't even use any sugar addition, you'll end up with like a 5.5
Okay.
normally. Yeah. And if you, of course, when you add sugar, you increase that ABV. So depending on the juice that I'm using, and sometimes I'll add like brown sugar just because it'll give it a little bit of a caramel-y kind of
Mhm.
residual flavor, and then that'll take the ABV. I like my ABV high. I like my cider to be like a slow sipping experience, so I can
Yeah.
drink a very small glass and get a nice little buzz.
Absolutely. That's the dream, right? That's the dream.
Yeah.
Heidi, thank you so
Yeah.
much for coming on the show. We will here's what we'll do. I'll do way better planning so I don't throw you like I don't have the whole cluster that I made you go through before this episode, but we will do a comprehensive episode on cider one time and bring you in because I'd love to pick your brain more on the in-depths. But I appreciate you coming and your time on letting our listeners know about West Coast Witches Brewing and the
Yeah.
booming world of ciding. Ciderine.
sure.
Ciderine? What is the present? Cider.
I think cidering. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I feel like the girl that got invited to the popular kids party, because you guys, if there was, I'm like the beer world, and you guys let me sneak in the back room.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never been called cool, but thank you for that, Heidi.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And that will do it for this episode of the Homebrew Happy Hour. If you have a question you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, visit homebrewhappyhour.com and click on the Submit a Question link at the top of the page. Or now you can call them in using our brand new hotline at 325-305-6107 and leave your message after the beep. You'll hear a little welcome message from me. Don't be afraid. Thank you to our show sponsor, KegConnection.com, for supporting our podcast and the home brewing community. Go to KegConnection.com, use the promo code HHH, and you'll receive 5% off your order. On behalf of my co-host who could not make it today and the Pearl Media Network, I'm Joshua Stubing. Thank you for listening.